Welcome to the Hard Boiled Software Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Larrabee, and today's guest is Adam Dymitruk, creator of event modeling and founder of the consulting group Adaptech. Adam and I go way back to the alt.net days. This is circa 2007, 2008, when we were a scrappy band of developers pushing back on the 800-pound gorilla that was Microsoft's approach to open source, software craft, domain-driven design, software design and architecture in general. Basically, we were forging as a group new opinions on how systems should be built, and pretty loud about it. Since then, Adam's gone deep on event sourcing and created the very popular framework event modeling, which is a visual notation for designing systems that read like a storyboard instead of a tangled architecture diagram. We get into why he built it, how it kills tech debt, and what AI means for the future of specs and planning. It's an occasionally spicy conversation, but one full of insights and what might seem like radical new ideas. So let's get into it. This is episode 5 of Hard Boiled Software Podcast with Adam Dymitruk. Adam Dymitruk, welcome to the Hard Boiled Podcast. It's great to see you, man. It's been quite a while.
Yeah, likewise. Great to see you. It's been many years, so nice to see that you're keeping going with what you've started and lots of success that I see you have over the years. So congratulations.
Yeah, congrats to you. Same to you, man. Yeah, we go back quite a while. I mean, we met each other, I don't know, 2007, 2008, mid 2000s. It was a simpler time, but
could have been even earlier if you were in Montreal by any chance for Dev Teach or any of those types of things. So I think we actually met, a long time
20 years ago, some shit. But anyway,
almost 20. Yeah. So it's been a while.
Yeah, no, man, it's been
you
great
look
to
the same,
see.
Though. You haven't aged.
Yeah, right. I have my hair, believe it or not, under this hat. I just am having a bad hair day, but. Yeah, man, I just love to kind of get into that context, like where we met. I mean, I think for me, there were like a bunch of things going on. There was like, of course, like the alt.net thing, which was all about open source, better practices, like,
Well,
just
the alt.net thing it started in Austin, right?
Yeah, Scott Billware.
I forget what the initial thing was, but it was a rebellion against Microsoft's ivory tower ideas about how software should be written and the treating enterprise development as the holy grail. And we all know how that ended up. Yeah.
I mean, they really did change. I think we were one hand on the flywheel because like right around that time, like the ASP.NET MVC came out, which was much more, it is what it is, but it was much more testable, and they started embracing open source.
.NET was a good thing, like C# and all that, to keep dragging Com Plus into the future and all that wouldn't have been good. So they needed an answer to Java, the JVM, because that was going to eat their lunch. And so they they surpassed Java, in my opinion, with everything that happened in intermediate language and all the stuff that Microsoft did. Microsoft Research did a lot of stuff. And I mean, going back, we can tie this back to other topics, but there's pockets of good in Microsoft. However, the corporate entity, the multi-headed dragon that we used to call it, was its own worst enemy a lot of times. And I think the lack of support of community spawned things like alt.net.
Yeah.
Where the developers would have to take care of each other because certainly Microsoft wasn't.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to like, please stop shipping sealed classes so that we can mock them, or isolate them in some way. I think there was like that. There were a lot of like, open source craft, like our new architectural styles that I think is where you kind of popped on my radar because you were part of this group that was really pushing at that time, very novel idea around event driven, event source kind of architectures and stuff like that. Like, how did you get mixed up with that?
So going back to alt.net, I mean, it all kind of started with alt.net because in 2005, because I was getting to a point of being frustrated. I've gone through 5 years of trying to do things better. I mean, my frustration with enterprise started in the late 90s, seeing just, drag and drop development for VB6, people getting paid crazy amounts for doing like horrific code and still somehow being enterprise developers was kind of weird. And when I saw Agile pop onto the scene, it's like, oh, okay, someone said something in this corporate environment, this world of Dilberts, that you now have to, you got to do something better. But it was at these extremes. You either had cowboy coding and your own opinion coding, versus some rigid, and at that point there was rational unified process. You had UML making strides to improve sort of the design, but that ended up being extremely heavy on the front. There was a misinterpretation of waterfall. Waterfall is actually iterative, but they made it all up front. Part of that stems, all the way, I learned later, stems back from having the industry not trusting vendors and saying specs will be done by one company, implementation by another, so you can't make specs for yourself to whatever. But it still ended up being a really nasty thing that put the big design up front problem in the spotlight. There's nothing in waterfall, there's nothing stated that you can't do iterations. In fact, the best waterfall approaches are iterative. They're just not bi-weekly or weekly or whatever. So, there's a whole bunch of FUD and misinterpretation. And then I also learned that years later, talking with one of the original Agile Manifesto people, that, Agile Manifesto was actually really more about developers standing up to being abused, much like we were standing up in Null.net to Microsoft, sealing their classes and just not being very friendly to the developer community, especially the open source side with the Linux is cancer and all that BS from Ballmer. We all were dealing with the fallout of that in there. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but there's a whole bunch of things that, all these things shaped me. I didn't like the way the status quo was. I grew up programming on a Commodore 64 with no corporate thing, right? In my way, you code, you feel the repercussions of not planning. I certainly had to be a lot more thoughtful because I started programming without a disk drive. We were a poor family, and so I keep saying this story, but it's important because every day after I came home from school, I'd have to type in the same program from a piece of paper and just add what I needed to get to the next level. So I learned to type very fast, very quickly, very young. And then I needed to, so I switched to Dvorak in 03, I think, just to see if I could get it even better. But in the retrospect, that was a mistake for a bit, but now I'm actually happy since we're doing mostly prompting. And Dvorak's good for English language, not for brackets and curly braces.
Right. Interesting. I find myself kind of shifting, like, and this is, I go way back to, like, I remember like purchasing Dragon Dictate, the software package, in a shrink wrap box, like probably at a brick and mortar store, and being like, oh, this is going to change my life. And it immediately installed it and I could just type faster. You know what I mean? I was basically all my workloads were programming back then. Right. So it was like,
exactly.
And now I just talk to the thing, and it's like, the models are so incredible. It's like, wow, I can talk way faster than I could type. I mean, not that was ever the bottleneck, but
But to tie a bow on this, like, I mean, my background, I didn't get into any specifics, but it is kind of like the rebel forces of Star Wars. I kind of feel like you and I were all the, Star Wars characters.
Yeah.
Battling the evil empire. And that was Microsoft, right? At that point, right?
Yeah.
I lumped in a lot more evil under the empire tag, like Apple, that most people won't do. But, we can leave that till the end of the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get to some of your enemy lists in a minute. Yeah, I think the angle I saw you kind of creeping into the community was around Greg Young, and there was a few other people that went on to create.
Yeah, that's where we left off. Yeah, there was
Scott
Bauer, JP Boodhoo, TDD sort of aficionados, people that were really pushing the right way to do agile. And in that sphere of influence, I definitely fell in love with just the fact that there is some discipline, like test-driven development and specification, spec-driven development, which we call now, but it was behavior-driven development, specification by example back then. And there was lots of things like Cucumber and all sorts of stuff that was coming out that was quite good because you could actually have that proper English language, business language translation into executable specs. So I could make something that would look like, that actually would read like sentences like you would have in a user story or whatever, but it was executable. It would tie in directly to the test under class or the system under class or the subsystem under class, whatever the seam was that you were interfacing with, that's what it would do. And so that ended up being quite good. I did a lot of work around promoting and using Jeremy Miller's Storyteller because it had that really nice graphical DSL interface where, if you create these fixtures, as they were called, you could make a sentence with a drop down, like the user subscribes to be, and then drop down platinum, gold, whatever, right? And then you would say, then therefore, your assertion is that their fees are, their payment, their price is $10 versus 20 or whatever. And that was a test, and that would get interpreted back through the test runner to execute against your code. And, if it did that, then it's green. If it's not, way better than just unit tests that only, developers interface with. And it was kind of, hey, maybe the business people can see a report that your tests running are all running green, and the tests weren't used as much as the spec, which I think was a huge miss opportunity. And of course, that's the deal. But yeah, at that same time, I was looking for all sorts of other things. I think that's the first time I started to play around with Ubuntu at home, I think I was making servers for recording TV. Remember those TV video cards?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So like if you're away from home, it's better than the VCR because you can download the programming schedule and you can have your TV card kind of do your thing. So it's really old tech, man. Anyway,
yeah,
like I got into a whole bunch of stuff just to see, how I could do it kind of opened the idea to open source. And of course, in the alt.net community with all these people like JP, et cetera, people were trying to, there's the famous story of NUnit and Charlie Poole, and then Microsoft coming out with their, what is it?
MS Test, I think it was
MS Test, right? MS Test or whatever it is. I'm out of the
MS Test Professional Enterprise Edition, visual testing 20. Yeah, whatever.
I mean, I wrote my own testing thing in JavaScript in a day, so it's not a big deal, but whatever. Back then, it was a big deal because this is what you would adopt in terms of library, so you can have a community supported and all that. So yeah, I'm glad that Charlie Poole did that. AUnit was the counterpart to JUnit to make sure that we had the same kind of open source stuff. And same thing happened with ORMs. You got Hibernate in Java, you got nhibernate in .NET. So yeah, we also want ORMs. And of course, then Microsoft came in with a sledgehammer saying, oh, well, it's not official Microsoft, so we need entity framework, right? And you had all these friggin' bootlickers saying, get rid of nhibernate because we've got the right answer from the corporation, right? It's just really, sorry, I'm getting too spicy early on.
No, keep it spicy. Keep the spice level high. Now, dude, I mean, Alt.net was called originally nhibernate Mafia. I don't know if you remember that.
That's right. But there was also there was the conference. There was some other name for it. I forget what it was. It was the nhibernate Mafia was kind of like the later one. There was an original name prior to Alt.net that originated in Austin, Texas, that I forget what it's called.
So Alt.net Open Space Conference, I think it was called.
That was one of the first ones, yeah. But it drew a big crowd. I mean, everyone from Fowler to Scott Hanselman in terms of like the .NET side, the Microsoft side. Like by the time you were in 2010, 2011, you had quite a large influential audience that was saying enough with the BS. The community has all this talent and you guys are just spitting in our face, and just kept going. Famous story of like Sebastian Lambla and all the stuff that he was doing. And then, he goes to bed in the morning, Microsoft's got a thing that replaces what he worked on for half a year, just like total kick in the teeth. Instead of support, you just totally overwrite everything, embrace, extend, extinguish to a T for their own community. Like horrible.
Yeah. Now, I mean, on the positive side, like I would say the alt.net time was where my POV really coalesced, because it wasn't just, TDD nerds. It was TDD, extreme programming people. And it was like open source people. And it was like over here, you've got this cabal of domain driven design people, which is, I think, where we're aligned to that group pretty closely. And like, domain-driven design to me was super, super influential. I mean, it's still kind of, it is how I articulate problem solving and stuff like that. And I know like that's kind of one of the stepping stones that we got to, where you get to like event modeling and all the stuff that you're kind of doing now. So like, I'd love to kind of dig into that. It's like, DDD.
So Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, DDD was the birthplace for traction with event sourcing. What happened? So, rewind back to the December of '05, Fowler writes the first event sourcing article, and I read it and I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. But it was phrased as if this is a cool experiment if you can do it. I didn't realize that it was actually saying, hey, you should be running entire systems as responsibly as accountants treat money, right? Like you should treat information like accountants treat money. Like you don't lose information. This is actually easy to do. And, the DDD community, at least for the .NET side of things, was an incubator for those ideas to kind of start. I wrote my first event store in '09 for a production system that was just a page of C# code, which worked just fine. And showed the simplicity of it, right? That you could actually do stuff without, a major database or a major product and still get the all of the ilities that you want out of software, the scalability, the maintainability, and all those things. And I didn't appreciate just how much that helped. Once I saw it juxtaposed to agile practices, I started to see the cracks in agile on a fundamental understanding level. Not that, well, hey, people are just doing Scrum wrong, or they shouldn't be doing Scrum, or just agile with a capital A versus small a. I'm like, no, I don't care what agile is saying. Even if you're doing it properly, it is fundamentally flawed from the very basic assumptions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just on DDD, like for me, there was this shift from DDD is about domain models and object models to DDD is about state and facts and write ahead logs and like essentially the underpinnings of event sourcing. The idea that, all of the state that changes, we're going to capture those state changes and more or less replay them through whatever software we have to get to a known good state. And anytime we can do that anytime, essentially that audit log is the dead object store.
Undisputed truth.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that to me was a shift I experienced.
Yeah, later on I saw the parallels to like systems thinking. It's really events are a true representation of capturing information at the border, at the edge of the system. And so the other thing that I didn't realize until many years later is that it's really something that takes subjectivity out of the design of systems, because the DDD or not, you had these consistency boundaries and you had these consistency pieces such as the aggregate, have one aggregate root that actually can channel and be a gateway for all changes to this collection of states or all these validations or whatever, so that you're not looking at the entire code base for where these rules are hidden. And that's great. That's a good organizational thing. But I noticed that you could go a lot further and you didn't actually need, we're going to get to like the modern practices around event sourcing, such as the dynamic consistency boundary, where you actually don't want to use aggregates and why you don't want to version events and, things that happen in the last, couple of years, 5 years even, where those traditional DDD approaches actually were a stepping stone to something bigger. And that's one of the things that I learned to do, is to let go. I mean, one of the hardest things for me to let go was all the behavior-driven development, all the spec-driven development, or specification by example, I should say. When you looked at event sourcing, you didn't need the fixtures. You didn't need that. You know why? Because the event was stated in English. So in order for me to do act, arrange, assert, or given when, then, or do any of these things, I stated in events, and those are human readable. And this goes back to the story of Mike Stockdale from Calgary. He had that idea initially where he said that, okay, well, why do you need a DSL? If you're actually writing really good C# classes and methods that make sense and they actually form understandable English words, you're naming your variables something that's understandable. We all want good naming and all that. Well, if that's the threshold of quality, then you should just be able to reflect the binary or your classes or whatever, and show a DSL that's auto-generated through reflection, because you have a class with a name, you have a method with a name, and by following a simple convention in good naming, it should be interpreted like English language. So I think it was Spec Sharp that he had, and that's what it was. It just said, if you're writing correctly, you shouldn't need a DSL. You shouldn't need this translation layer. And so why not skip any of these arguments and just look at events? So event sourcing just cures all that stuff. It's something that I had a hard time letting go because I got so good at it, or at least so used to it, back in '07, '08, it's been a few years of me doing that. And then to realize that, wait, I need to throw this away. I'm really good at it and I love it, but it's in the way. It's garbage.
Yeah.
Same thing with like even within event sourcing itself, versioning events, V1 to V2 has to be, you have to have an upcaster. A guy in our community, Yordis, said, that's bullshit. You don't need that. You should actually interpret both versions of the event by each read model, because what you're doing by introducing an upcaster functions, you're coupling. That's yet more coupling sneaking in.
Right. For what?
So, all these interesting things just keep evolving.
Yeah, no. So like in that example, it really is the attachment to this software, not the event. Like essentially you're saying, oh, I need to keep my software in this kind of contemporary current state, where you're saying the events and the data that represented in those events really drives the evolution of the system in a way that you should keep the old command processors or event process, whatever, components around that.
Because it doesn't cost you anything. If you have an event handler that handles the old event just below the new event, you can just look at the new event if you're working with the new clients. But nothing erases the fact that your company last year was working with this idea of handling these events this way. And there's no need to avoid it, especially with the biggest aha moment, of course, in all of this journey is that you're using multiple models. The biggest problem in software today is the fact that people insist on a single canonical model. They insist on reusable abstractions because it's sold as the ultimate thing, from all the way from academia, where you're learning about inheritance and all this BS. It doesn't actually mirror the real world and the way the real world works, the way actual information systems have been talked about long before computers ever even were a thought of to anyone. We've had trading companies that span the globe on pen and paper and somehow scale to that without needing a proper abstraction. It goes back to actual ledger, is that they could actually account for what happened. And if it took them a little bit longer to just check that the balance was correct, it saved them from making a mistake of tanking the company by buying for the wrong price, buying too much or whatever. That is how we naturally evolved our civilization to have systems. And and the reason it evolved that way is it's because the way our mind works. So when someone says, oh, event sourcing is hard, no, what's hard is for you to get out of the bullshit that we put on in the last, 5 decades of working within very tight constraints. Now those constraints aren't there, but we built so much tooling that we can do the actually horrible dysfunctional stuff really easily because we have a ton of tools for it. And it's already established as a given practice. So that's kind of how I see it. And
it's super counterintuitive.
That. Yeah, it's very counterintuitive. But going back, tying all this together, it's like that alt.net community and all that was the first place that I found where I could, have a welcome, like a voice of dissent was welcome. It's like a fresh idea, just wouldn't pass in corporate boardrooms and all that. And I was always kind of climbing the corporate ladders and all that, or trying to be a consultant, trying to introduce new concepts. But there was always never room. There was always a promise of room to improve, but nothing really would shake out. People just wanted to not get fired for not saying yes to a better approach. But then when it came to execution, they wouldn't have the balls to kind of put the risk, put themselves at risk if said experiment was going to fail. And so the corporations and the positions within have a very self-protective thing that no one will out loud say.
Yeah, that's definitely something that led me to seeking independence, in terms of my financial outcomes and my, freedom of speech, and like, all those things. Like, I'm like, I can't live in a world being some kind of, technical leader or product leader or contributor and just having to deal with those decisions. So let me find a niche where I can get paid to articulate my opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Freedom is worth fighting for, and especially for yourself, to just your own sanity.
Yeah. I think, like, back to DDD for a second, like, we both called out the fact that Blue Book, man, is a bear of a read. And it's like, I think it was like a badge of honor. It's like, have you made it through once? Have you made it through twice? Have you studied the deep, the ancient scrolls? And it's, I'm not, necessarily picking on Eric's language, but it's very, it's a read. It's almost a literary kind of thing like that. And it took, like, that book came out in 2003, and we were like buzzing about it 2007. So I mean, it didn't at least in our space take hold
I would say it
until
didn't really become big until 2010 almost. Like it's,
yeah.
I can definitely see that things like, yeah, maybe within our own few people that were kind of talking to a lot of DDD people, I think it was earlier. Maybe for you it was. I certainly felt a lot more of it after 2009, 2010.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I felt like my first talks started out as DDD book reports. Basically, I'm like,
Yeah.
I like it.
Aren't
You should
they?
too.
We
And
were all there, yeah.
yeah, and it's fine. It's a fine place to start. I mean, passion counts for a lot, and communication counts for a lot, and spreading the word and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I think, yeah. So just kind of context, all this stuff was happening, that kind of led us to this language oriented programming. I remember we were doing like fluent APIs everywhere. And I remember
Yeah. Well,
one
just
time I
so
wrote,
to make it easy for people to program, right? You have the
yeah,
press the dot, and then IntelliSense pops up with
yeah,
whatever. We tried to do that with
exactly.
fixtures so that you could actually make a sentence for what you could
Which,
say next. It's kind
which
of weird because it's kind of like AI, foreshadowing to AI. Like, what's the
totally,
next thing?
totally. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a blog post called English is My New Programming Language in 2008. And I'm like, not like I'm some kind of Nostradamus,
No, exactly.
futurist genius. I'm just like, obviously reading this stuff is much better and it makes the job better. It's like, what's the point? But yeah, I mean, all this kind of stuff leads up to event modeling. So I would love to just kind of dig into, which is your creation, and you've built a community around it. And that's kind of, it's evolved and grown, although I think you really have kept it really pure. But I just, for people listening, can you give them kind of the elevator pitch on event modeling, what it is, what problems it solves, like, and then I'd like to back up into saying, like, how did you arrive at this innovation?
Yeah. Event modeling is the simplest way to describe a system. And whether that is in order for you to develop it, in order for you to maintain a legacy one, in order for you to track work, whatever the software development life cycle task you need to do, event model on purpose has it built in. It's kind of like the Swiss Army knife that will allow you to drop the giant tool belt that we all think we have to wear in terms of managing large and small and enterprise level projects. So event modeling is a notation and a process at the same time. So it's a simple notation that kind of looks like a sideways sequence diagram, but it cuts out the how. So you don't want the minutia of the implementation, but you need enough information so that it's still useful. And so you use events to demark where state is changed. Otherwise, it just looks like a wireframe storyboard that you would have for your application with some notes below, but the notes are actually flows of data. And so a lot of learnings about this came from, obviously, behavior-driven development and specification by example, because it has a few tenets, like it will not do branching. Sequence diagrams have branching, lots of other workflow diagrams or activity diagrams or any of these other notations usually have a kind of way to say that at this point I can go to A or B, and then you have a whole bunch of other things that happen behind those, and the tree grows. And the problem is the human mind can't remember a graph, but human minds are incredibly good at remembering stories. And so we stick to a storyline only by example. So when you look at an event model, it's literally like a storyboard for a movie. It is the movie you want to play out in order for your system to be successful. If you develop something that does exactly what this does, that's perfect. With the additional benefit that you're including all of the state transitions there in plain English so that it works both for business and for tech. And so that's been our default. And thank you for giving me the credit, but it's really about the work that all the people at Adaptec have been doing. And of course, the workshop format heavily borrowed from event storming. In fact, we used to call it event storming, and we just thought we were doing it better than Alberto, but it's just a different thing.
Yeah.
So I went to the event storming summit in 2018. It was like, I said, hey, this is the way you do it. Look, drew it out in like 10 minutes on one of those, card things on the side where people can make notes. And that's where the first 7 steps of event modeling were actually written down, but it's really what we were doing, just thinking we were doing BDD and all these other practices as a collection in a really good way that really gelled for some reason. And the secret that we didn't know that we had was that we were doing it in one place. So we didn't have a separate BDD tool. We didn't have a separate Jira storage, ticket storage like Jira. We didn't have a separate whatever, right? Everything happened on one thing. And being a small consultancy at the time, we didn't have the budget and the time to go and purchase tools and hire people and all of that to get these things going. So it was like, how do I and like my one first CTO employee, Nicola, go and build large systems as two people? And so we needed the Swiss Army knife, and it proved to continue to work. Discovered something by accident. That simplicity is one of the hardest things to achieve, but once you have simplicity and it works, then it's like you got to hold on to that, because you can go so fast with high quality and all the other things in that iron triangle that so many places aspire to. And one of the biggest things that event modeling allowed us to do is to work on fixed costs and fix bugs for free. That's like a death sentence for any regular consultancy. But because we were working with event sourcing and event modeling, we had multiple models, which means that we're not going to get that coupling problem where you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or it's a house of cards. You take one out and all the previous features you wrote, break because you on purpose keep building, like in event sourcing, brand new read models or brand new projections for whatever purpose you have. You're leaving that source of truth, the event stream, the ledger untouched. It's an immutable ledger. Sounds like music to my ears if you're like a functional programmer, right?
Right.
All of these good things that you have, all these good practices that you really need, are all baked in there by its nature. So I basically said that I'm starting my company to just do it this way so I can prove that event modeling, event sourcing is good. And we grew to a large size by doing projects in this way where we would fix bugs for free, and somehow, things continued to grow, and projects were finished on time and on budget because they were just limited. You had this many slices on the event model. That's all the client paid. And if they wanted to do more or less, then that's it.
Yeah.
So event modeling really, that wasn't one sentence, but event modeling is really a schematic. It's like opening up your TV from the 60s and you open up the back panel and there's your schematic for like where everything's connected. If you have to replace a vacuum tube, you know where to go to replace it. You can follow the traces on the schematic. People need that for their systems. They need to, it's kind of information flow. You know where everything is. Here's the workflow for signing up and logging in for the first time with your email verification. Here's you as an administrator adding new products, the catalog for your customers to look at. Here's you checking out as a customer, with the cart and paying. Everything's by example. Everything's got the UX UI is like super high importance in event modeling, and it's what most other disciplines don't emphasize because that's not technical. Oh, that's subjective. But every system is built for human beings. Human beings look at the interface. And even if you have a backhand heavy thing, your administrators are still looking at logs. They're still looking at dashboards. And so those should be shown. And those should be looked at on those parts of the workflows by those people, because it makes sense. It gives them a bridge to talk about to the other person as the product owner or whatever about, why they have a certain piece of information there, or why it takes an extra second, or why the SLA is this way. They can give them that reference because they're working off the same blueprint. It's really like, another example is that the event model is like a blueprint that you roll out at a job site for a house, building a house. The plumber, the carpenter, all of those people go and look at the same blueprint to understand where the holes in the walls are going to be cut out by the carpenter so that the plumber can buy the right pipes and put them in the right place at the right time. It's the same idea. So most things in life you wouldn't do without a blueprint, yet we just throw agile at everything. Just throw stuff against the wall and keep testing for feedback because that's going to give you the best solution. And so we've learned that the hard way. And the key there is that event modeling is like the very bare minimum small design up front that Agile promised but never told us how to do it or anything like that. Just don't do big design up front. We're not anti-design, just don't make it big, but do whatever you want. And which meant like we're not going to suggest anything. So event modeling is an answer to that Agile problem as well, that no one ever said what small design up front is. They didn't count on the fact that it's going to bite them because it shows that common practices like TDD are actually extremely bad because they force reworking code that you shouldn't have to touch. With multiple models and event modeling and event sourcing, you leave what's already working alone. There's no
So that's
need
the
to
key
have.
point. Is like it's add only, right? You
Yeah,
don't.
it's incremental only.
There's a kind of a geology or archaeology to that software architecture
Absolutely.
where you prior decisions are not eradicated. They're built over, right? Or you change it incrementally, or you steer it with new commands, new events. I think like one of the things that I'd love people to kind of understand about event modeling is there are several. I mean, events are the main character, right? That's the main show. But there's all these other little primitives, like you mentioned, read models, and that replaying those events, we can decide to have different read models. We can have a graph database. We could have a data lake. We can have all the,
it's not
new
implementation. You can do whatever you want to achieve each of those steps. That's what people always mistake, that if you have a sort of a diagram that it actually has to say something about the technology, but it actually doesn't. The best thing about event modeling is that it keeps its focus on the information flow, and it really doesn't care whether that particular state that you're looking at is achieved by running this database or running this program, or whether it's running in Ruby or .NET or whatever. It does not care. In fact, a good similarity is like the serverless approach. You could write functions for your serverless stuff in different languages. I can have one in C#, you can have one in F#, you can have another one in whatever, right? You can have these different functions doing whatever they need to do and just, kick the ball along to the next thing. And they shouldn't care that the next thing is in a different language. Event modeling allows you to totally capitalize on that and allows way more fluidity to how your organization works, because you can hire more people without that darn, but he's a Ruby developer, we're a C# shop, right? So you get rid of those problems. Of course, culturally inside larger organizations, that's a hard ask. But for startups, it's a lot easier to say, well, we'll just write this other system in Python, and the system will be in whatever this other person likes. And if you have an event model, you can coordinate between them. They don't need to understand each other's implementations to have the whole solution work, which is, I think, the key. Just like, you have maybe someone that's a specialist in alternators, you can use them to do something for the alternator, and you have a brake specialist to work on your brake pads.
Right.
I mean, you still have the car, and they can still coordinate. So similar thoughts. Like it's very engineering based. It's sort of trying to bring back some of the engineering principles we have everywhere else into software and into information systems, so that we can have the same guarantees and lack of the problem. It's really addressing the problems that we have that other industries don't. There's a Dilbert didn't exist for no reason. It's like
it became
we don't have a
Dilbert after a while.
We don't have a Dilbert for car mechanics. I'll just say that.
Right. I mean, maybe I made some wrong career choices, but so adapt. I mean, you, for the last, 10 years, for quite a while, you all have been building with this POV architecture tool. Like, give us some sense of what domains you've worked in at AdaptTech, or, personally, like what kinds of systems are you using to use, event sourcing and event modeling in?
It sounds like it's a niche, but it isn't. So I'll say that it's any information systems. You have to realize that 99% of the world is information systems.
Yeah.
You go to the grocery store, you're at a point of sale checkout. Use Twitter, you look at information. You use, restaurant booking software. It's information systems. And all of them are much better off by working off of an immutable state on the ledger to understand what is going on. Unfortunately, the whole software industry is built on here's current state, and you shouldn't and can't care about what it used to be. When you change, like even for I mean, it's crept into business with Excel having no real history of what that particular cell or row had. As soon as you type it over and put a new value in, and you go email that Excel sheet to someone else, it's gone, right? So it's really about the responsibility of of understanding how valuable information is. And there's an entire aspect of data that's missing if you're not doing that. That's really important for most information systems. And that's a temporal aspect of data, is that everything, it's not just a created and modified date on a row. It should actually be on an actual ledger when that is. There's a famous saying that's always used that accountants don't have erasers for a reason, right? You don't go back and change anything in the ledger that can get you in trouble.
Yep.
And you need that, what's the root word of accounting, right? Accountability, right? It's take into account of what happened. And we need that same discipline in software. And when people say that event sourcing is hard because you have to keep all the previous events, it's actually quite easy because it reduces the number of patterns and ways that you can work with something. CRUD, or create, read, update, delete, is a lot harder because you have a lot of technology in between you and the data to make it all work. You also have a lot more coupling because most of the time these CRUD systems try to save time by having, one place for, like, let's say your user info, and then like 5 different pieces of functionality all use that user table. And like, oh, that's really great because we can fix something in one place. But you know what the corollary to that is? I can't even pronounce that word. The same thing, but from a different aspect is, well, if one of them breaks something, it breaks it for all of them. People never talk about the fact that, abstraction is great. One place, I can fix it. It's like the opposite of that is that you break one thing, you break it for 5 other places. That's why it feels like you're walking on eggshells with all these traditional systems that have this cost hockey stick curve where, greenfield feels great. Everyone's cranking out a feature every week. And then by the time 6 months hits, it's, you can't get people to work. People are hanging their heads in shame and stand-ups. And it's like, it takes a month to get something done. And every time you make any progress in any feature, you're breaking things that already worked. And that's because the coupling's not in check. And the best way to get coupling in check is to use event sourcing, is to use an immutable ledger it's not a subjective thing because you're capturing data at the boundary. No one can argue that someone entered this on this form at this time. And therefore, everyone has to work off of that instead of some subjective abstraction of what a user is. And then some poor form had to contort itself to shove data into these constructs that some armchair architect thought was a good idea because it looks good or whatever, right?
Yeah, this is where you get like the table data type in a SQL. It's like, okay, or now he's storing like, it's just this, get, tech debt just seems like something that this approach, cost of change.
We don't have tech debt.
Okay.
If you don't want tech debt, well, you just leave things alone. Like, you don't need, like, once it works, there's no way that a previous feature is breaking a future feature. It doesn't share the same projections. You're just working with the same model. But there's other things that it helps. Like, you don't have migration problems, like schema migrations. They just don't exist because you're always migrating at the right. You're always having to deal with the new version of the data and the old version of the data at the same time as you're developing. It's not pushed off to some great big push when some DBA and some senior devs are going to gather around and look at the master schema of the database and figure out how the hell we're going to make these set of tables with these relationships fit into these set of tables with these relationships. And oh, by the way, we have petabytes of data. You better not make a mistake. Are you friggin' kidding me? Yeah. What a joke, right? We don't want that.
No, I had this realization. I remember it very clearly. I was working at an agile tracking tool company, and I got to kind of lead the road mapping feature, which was kind of a separate application. And we spent about 3 or 4 weeks trying to make temporal objects work. Essentially, we wanted to capture history and all this stuff. And we tried to do the temporal Fowler, object pattern. And it got to be like, what the hell are we doing? And so I'm like, stop. We're going to hit the reset button and we're going to go command source, event source in the back. And that let us then create all kinds of read models essentially around, you want to see where the roadmap was a month ago? Cool. Yeah. Now you've got one you can replay events back and forth. And it, like, almost for free, we got time dimension, which was one whole chunk of features, like I said, for free. And it was like, oh my God, the code looks different and it looks a little weird. It looks a little foreign because we have all these.
You don't have ORMs everywhere.
No, we didn't. Yeah, we didn't really. So it was like really, this is maybe 2010 or something like that. That was my first, like, okay, I've been hearing about this from you, from Greg Young used to call me up on Skype all the time and be like, I feel like he's like, if I can explain event sourcing to Larrabee, then I can explain it to anyone kind of thing. Like, so I know, whatever, but you know how he is. But, and so, but then I was like, oh, let me try that. Some years later, tried it out and I was like, okay, yes, this is the way to do it, So
yeah, it's one of those things where it's the opposite of the hockey stick curve. Like people say that you have incremental costs as the size of your solution grows, because things are, for the reasons I said already, the coupling gets crazy, and you have all these side effects because you're trying to use this best intention of having just the right abstraction to serve multiple purposes, and event sourcing is the exact opposite. You're trying to have as many semi copy and pasted pieces of functionality so that each functionality has exactly what it needs. And how can you coordinate them? Well, you coordinate them with the set of events that are undisputed, because that's what data entered at that particular point in time. So yeah, it's funny how a simple thing can be so hard to convince many people of. It's just the status quo, and you got to realize the whole industry is built on companies that are selling tools for doing things a certain way. And so this huge inertia of non-technical reasons why things are the way they are technically. And it's got to do with who is Microsoft selling what to who, right? And like what technologies they're selling to your government, to your bank, to your whatever. And then the aspiration of the junior developer to rise through the ranks and get a high paying job at said bank, said government, stability job, whatever. Yeah. Horrible feedback loop of keeping things the way they are. So, but I'm really happy that AI is taking a sledgehammer to a lot of this.
Let's dig into that. I mean, I think, I'd love to kind of understand how I kind of ask all of our guests, like, okay, the AI era is here, this stuff is coming, and some of it's useful, some of it's hype, but I'd love to kind of understand how you're leveraging AI, what your POV is, like where you're integrating it into your worldview. Like, yeah, just give us your AI spiel.
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone that's programmed has had the aha moment the first time my aha moment with AI was the first time I was working with some crazy CSS. And, it's the Peter Griffin GIF with the blinds, right? I don't know if you can overlay that over our chat.
I'll try.
It's a nightmare, right? And so you're trying to make something nice, like a button, look good, and maybe have some animation to reset the button a little bit, or maybe make it wobble a bit or something like that. And just the transitions, the transition thing in CSS. I mean, I even bought a book about how to do it properly and all that. And then one day I was sitting at a meetup and it was on my laptop, and ChatGPT was just starting, and I finally got my account, and I typed in, hey, how would you, I want to this animation. It goes, okay, Gronk's away. There's some CSS that appears. I'm like, okay, paste it in. It's just like, wow, my jaw just dropped, because I knew that instant I saved 3 hours. It was the aha moment. I talk about this aha moment all the time. I had that aha moment when I first saw a Commodore 64, that I could make a machine do what I want. I could actually have this at home and like make it do things, right? You have these incredible things, and the first time you're on the internet and you're like, oh my God, I can just look up this information about, on Wikipedia, or even before it existed, but like I could connect to all of these things. You're like, wow. Or the first time you saw email, it's like, oh, this is awesome. I just, someone's got this document across the world. This is amazing. And it's in someone else's home now. Bulletin boards, right? There's all of these huge aha moments. For me, one of them was, of course, event sourcing. Is like, oh my God, I don't have to suffer through technical debt. Oh my God, I don't have to suffer through schema migrations. I don't have to suffer through trying to make all these tests green and get totally stuck with the horrible refactoring that ended up needed to be done to the level of changing the tests, and I have to redo a bunch of tests, not just my implementation now. Those are all aha moments. Discovering Linux. Oh my God, I don't have to pay. I have full freedom. I can patch this myself. They're points of no return, right?
Yeah.
AI is the next point of no return. You can't undo the internet. It's not going to be like, oh, the famous story. The internet's a fad. I don't know if you remember that. It's not as popular as people thought it would be. It's going to fail.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no way of closing the Pandora's box on AI. There's absolutely no way. The fact that Google gave us access to everything but AI gives us a way to make sense of everything instantly instead of having to pour through that everything that we got from Google is a many orders of magnitude a multiplier in efficiency. And I think anyone that's calling this a bubble, sure, there may be some grifters that are going to go broke because they just don't, their point is to make money, not to understand and extend the technology. Probably some of the big guys included. But the fact that you have this inference engine working for you is something you can't put back.
No, it's such a...
We're not going back.
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of my life now. I mean, I think like we're constantly, like, one thing that it's really led to is, this is kind of a cliche now, but it's, the bottleneck's shifting left to planning, right? And I think this is where I bring back techniques like event modeling. There you go. Here's a planning, something you can sit down, talk to a person that's got 30 years experience in the business and knows every little detail about loan origination or whatever complex domain we're talking about. And that's just one from my past, and sit down and be like, okay, let's look at this work. And then on the AI side, you almost have zero time to, and will probably be real time, in a hurry, feedback loop in terms of, is this what you meant? It's like there's no, it's literally the lowercase agility that we wanted, that we were promised.
Well, I stopped using the word agility and used flexibility, because that was just such a loaded term. So I said our solutions are flexible, and we don't need to even talk about agility because it was just so polarizing on so many. Yeah, there was a capital A, a lowercase a. There was the safe people. There was the Scrum people. There's the whatever. So I just stopped talking about agile altogether. I'm saying that, hey, how do you know your stuff won't break? It's like, I don't touch stuff that already works. How do you do that? I do it this way. End of story. So a lot of the controversial stuff is like, we don't do TDD because we don't need to. There's no reason to. I don't even test, because I know that even if I manually make something work, even though it has no tests, I know that the way we develop, we don't touch that code for any new functionality. So the fact that it has no unit tests, does that matter? Not at all. Not to us. And so we can move on. It's kind of like I guess it's a form of the OCP, open close principle, that you just don't touch things you've already done. And if we ever have to go back and change it, we wholesale usually will delete that and look at the event model, the actual living spec, and say, all right, how are we changing it? Okay, what's going to happen here? We actually draw it out. We get agreement from everyone. Okay. And then just that step we re-implement. And like Lego, they click. Those Lego pieces are super simple. Either those events exist on the timeline or they don't. And either they have this information or they don't. And that's better than any technical API compatibility or any of that kind of crap. We just don't need to deal with it. We deal with the information at a level that's understandable by everyone, and that can glue all of the steps in the workflow together for everyone.
That's something I really want people that have made it this far in the podcast to understand, is that the architectural style that is represented by event sourcing, event modeling, and the kind of tools we've been discussing leads you to a place where you have strong component definitions, which, if we go back to the original component, it's a unit of reuse, but it's also a unit of replacement. And when we start looking at a system as like a composite of many smaller systems, replacing those things becomes an option. You know what I mean? You don't have to have an invasive open heart surgery on a legacy system to kind of say, let's just recode gen that.
It's the Unix philosophy at work. Like many specific tools that do one thing really, really well. And you can think of each page in your application as, why don't you let that thing be its own utility that does only that, right? Yeah. Why do you need to have a giant monster utility for everything with, hey, your thing that you're doing here is just but one unimportant feature for me. And that's probably a good way of putting it, is that when you're doing things in a centralized way, you diminish the value of what you're working on in this specific workflow.
Awesome. You said Unix philosophy, you're speaking my love language.
Yeah.
We kind of built our whole business that way. It's like all these little things can be strung together in different ways to meet what you need. All right, let's talk about the book, the much anticipated Adam Dymitruk event modeling book. Like, just kind of book what's up next. Let's kind of.
It's actually two books.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it's 2 books, and the reason I want 2 books, one, we mentioned the problem with Eric's book, the domain-driven design book, is that it was like you can kill someone hitting them with it, right? It's so big, right? So I definitely wanted event modeling to always be something that doesn't require a book to be understood and used. That wasn't the best idea because some people needed a single source of truth for how to do it properly. And the article I wrote in 2018 after coming back from the Event Storming Summit was really just a frustration and a 8-hour effort of just putting my thoughts down on paper, much like it was with the branch per feature article. And both of those ended up being on Hacker News. The event modeling one ended up being a top story back in the fall of 2018. And so I started to see all these emails come in, and it was really weird. You get, only happened once in my life to get a Hacker News article go to number 1, but everything lights up on your computer. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, it gets hot. It's all of a sudden super
Everyone's
hot.
kind of like looking at your website, contacting you for whatever. It was a neat experience. But anyway, so the idea behind the book is that you need something. You had Michael Feathers on your podcast, right? I love his Welk book because of the format. It has this, not only that, I mean, it's really good if you want to know how to do TDD, and it's under the legacy code title, but the dirty secret is that it really teaches you how to do unit testing properly, right? So the format of that book is that you have the theory and practice in the beginning, and then you have reference material for the rest of the book in terms of the types of patterns, the types of dysfunctions you find in code, and how to apply methods to untangle those problems and then bring it into something more manageable. So the idea is very similar for the event modeling book, is that you want to kind of get a deeper understanding of everything I've said here as to why it exists, what the core pieces are, why we have only so few pieces, why is it so simple, what are those simple pieces, what are the rules for stitching them together. You want that out of the way, but then at the end, you really want to have a book of reference patterns. So if you say, well, what are the problems that most people keep having to solve over and over again? I don't know how many times you have to do a sign-up page, right? Or a landing page for some company, or how many times you have to have a checkout cart or a payment integration, right? We want all of the top 90% of the things that most people work through in information systems as examples. This is how you do it using event modeling. Right? And, you would include that in your event model for your company, but hey, at least you have, how do I do payments? How do I sign up? How do I do any of these things, rating systems, whatever? How do I integrate to different teams and subcomponents in my company that have to do, a pub sub or something, on the enterprise, all of those things that we've been talking about. How do you scale? How do I know that I can get this many people? And that's seems like a technical thing, but scalability is actually something that you can explain business-wise. And one of the key things about the event modeling book is that it's not technical. It's about information structure, like the information flow structure, which makes it equally good for technical and non-technical people. And I want it to be the bridge. So the reason I didn't put it out there earlier is because there was so many new learnings that were happening anyway. And this idea that I never wanted event modeling to be thought of as something that you need a book to understand. And obviously I drew that opinion from the things we talked about the DDD book being so scary and hey, have you actually read the thing, right? I didn't want that to be the event modeling story too, right?
Yeah,
so
user experience.
Here's my opinion,
right?
how you do it. Here's a 50 chapter, 1,000-page book on event modeling. It's like, not for me, thanks.
Yeah.
I think I had a presentation famously that always said, if you give the DDD book to a team or a company or whatever, half the people will say they'll do it, and then half of those will actually do it. The others won't for various reasons. And the people that do it, only half of those understand it, and half of those can actually implement it, and half of those can only teach others. And by the time you keep landing that book in an organization, you've got like a 1% effective adoption, which
It's
is
not a very
so
good
much trouble.
conversion. Yeah. Yeah.
So I had these reservations about writing a book to do that, and that's why I really wanted that initial article to go as long as it could. And then other people out of frustration have written books. So Martin Dilger in Germany wrote the event
Read it.
sourcing book, but it uses event modeling throughout, and it's a very easy way to understand event sourcing. He does everything by example, and he's using event modeling throughout. So the event modeling book is coming out this year. But one of the things about the DDD book that was really interesting, when Eric visited our office back in 2018, he gave the little booklet, the domain-driven design companion booklet to the
I
DDD book. Think
remember.
of Cole's notes from your university days when you would get the Cole's notes on like Shakespeare plays or whatever. If you're doing English, you'd have a little Cole's notes thing that just takes you through the important parts and gets you an understanding very quickly. That little booklet was like so good for understanding everything in DDD. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to do this in reverse. I'm going to start with the booklet. And so the booklet is going to be ready, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Already written most of it. I have a ghostwriter that's helping me to do it. I'm mostly more like someone that cracks a whip than a ghostwriter, I would say.
An accountability buddy.
So that's the idea, is that I really still want that. The people that really want a book, they can get a book. They can already get Martin's book, which covers event sourcing as well, which is great. But if they want event modeling, they'll get something that they can use immediately. That'll be applicable stuff, just like the little Cole's Notes DDD book that Eric gave me. And then this year, the full book is coming out, and that's going to have the whole backstory of like, what we talked about here, why, the incentives for having event modeling. Like, why does it need to exist? Why is it a really good practice compared to everything else out there? And then, of course, have the library of examples through there throughout the book, especially the back half of the book, to make sure that as you continue going, you're absorbing stuff you can apply to your work immediately, right? It's one of those things that I loved about all the books that I loved in tech were highly applicable. They weren't too esoteric and too flowery language and ideas. I mean, those have a place too, but in terms of my experience, what helped me in my career were things that I could immediately apply, things that would sit on my desk that, were dog-eared because I looked at them so much for reference. Michael's book is one of those. So I would want something that I would use. And I think Martin wrote the book on event sourcing because he was frustrated of not getting a single source for event sourcing. And so he said, well, I'll just write it myself too. So what would I want? Selfishly, I can say I can represent what the community wants. And I think with our Discord community, we've had so many questions pop up so often that I know I have a good gauge of which parts to make sure to answer, even in the booklet, but then really go deep into in the main book. And so,
Nice.
yeah, I'm excited to have it done. And this is a good year to do it too, because it's a pivotal point with AI and people are going to be asking for how do we get the specs to be better? And I'm not sure if you saw the video that I had back from Cursor when I pasted in the given when then from the given when thens from the event model as a picture into the Cursor chat window. And this was way more than a year ago, so the models weren't that good. And it gave me all the unit tests and the implementation without hallucinating, all in the first try. Yeah. That is how good, spec-driven development is, all the stuff that you're talking about, except they don't understand what a good spec is because the industry has been inundated with bad specs. Event modeling is that answer. So everyone will want to have an understanding of event modeling and follow it fully or take lessons from it at least.
Yeah, that's cool. Man, this is a great place to wrap it up. Dude, I could go for another hour, but I don't think anyone's going to listen to us go on and on. I think what better plan of action is when the book comes out, hit me up and let's check in then and see what's going on.
Yeah,
we'll have
absolutely.
You back for another episode.
Always a pleasure to chat. So I hope if people have any kind of questions, they can hit me up on our Discord channel.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I'll put AdaptTech. I'll put all your whole link tree in there, man. So really want to thank you again, Adam, Dymitruk, everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
All right. Looking forward to the next time. Thanks.